All right, so I want to give a brief update on the two of the cruises from the Distributed Biological Observatory in 2019. We will be having an international meeting. We'll have more data sets at the Pacific Arctic Group meeting in October, and I'll mention that later. But I've entitled this Warming Seawater and Biological Change because of what we're seeing on both of those cruises with the lack of sea ice. So we'll go to the next one. So I think most everybody knows about what the Distributed Biological Observatory is, but I put some text here. We've been seeing a dramatic amount of changes, particularly, as you know, the sea ice retreat and thinning sea ice. We have had really high warm surface waters this year, and I think Bob Picard, who's on the line too, can attest to that, as well as others that were on the cruise. Earlier spring sea ice retreat and late water formation and seawater warming. As I would go down, this has an impact with the DBO. We do standard transect lines. The two cruises, I'll give you some brief updates, are from the Laurier cruise we do with on our Canadian through our NSF project, and on the Healy that Bob Picard was chief scientist on. I was co-chief with NOAA support and other agencies involved in that. So for the next slide, whoops, let me see how this works. Okay, so you've seen this map before for many of you on the line. We do have these standard measurements for that, our core ship sampling you can see on the upper right, and they range from looking at the TNS, chlorophyll, plankton, benthos, and we have seabird and marine mammals. And I would point this out as an important aspect because in parts of the southern part of the DBO, we don't have as many of particularly the flyover observations on some of these organisms, and we are seeing changes, and Kathy Kulete will speak about that towards the end about the unusual mortality events we're seeing, both in the seabirds, but also in the marine mammals. We also have collaborations and gliders, moorings, sail drones, satellite observations with our NASA work. And you can see primarily we worked on the DBO 1 through 5 lines, as you can see in this figure. The next figure you're seeing is just a composite of a schematic of what is done from the spring and the summer cruises, going from the left to the right. Primarily go out to sea in the springtime around May, coming back out in October and November, and some of the picking up the different phenology or the timing of that of the biological production associated with changes in sea ice temperature and light cover. And a lot of what is happening now in the DBO, besides standard measurements, is we are looking at process studies and carbon measurements throughout the different programs that are occupying these standard lines. What you're seeing here is a composite just of the last 5 years, and I just wanted to point out this is the sea ice persistence. So you're looking at the amount of time that sea ice is occupying from the south to the north with the DBO colors in the background. And I would just point out as you move from 213, 218, this is our DBO 1 area where we had ice pull back in February, and no further did we have that in 218. And we're seeing that earlier and earlier that we're losing that sea ice, and what does come back is very thin. One of the things we started out on these sampling cruises, the Laurier was in July, the Healy in August, was in June, having these maps come out by this is an ACCAP, the Climate Assessment Policy Group. And you're seeing that very warm, these are the anomalies in sea surface temperature from normal. And what you're seeing here is up to 7 degrees in the areas, particularly going from north of St. Lawrence Island into the Chukchi Sea. And what you will see as I show you some data is you can double that actual amount. We were seeing 15 and 16 degrees Celsius surface water, which is extremely warm. And that had this warm water pulsing through the system. For the Sir Wilfrid Laurier, these are the standard DBOs for both the Laurier and work that we did on the Healy and others who occupy these lines. The southern one is DBO 1, you march to 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this black line here is the cable that is for fiber optic cable. So we have been working with the company we did when they laid this down, but we have to be particularly careful up by the Barrow Canyon line because it's not buried at that point. But this is something they did contact me again this year, concerned about what cruises are up there and closeness of sampling by that cable. So one of the points I would point out is in the northern Bering Sea, which is our southernmost DBO line, this is some Phil Stavino's recent paper, and this is the anomalies, and this is from the mooring that's near bottom there, and you can see there's stages of warm, then we had cold in the middle of the 2000, like from 4 to 2012, 13 here, and then we've been having this warm across the line. This is just, these are bottom water values at the DBO1 area, and on the lower left what you're seeing is some of the results of the bottom water went 3 degrees higher in 2018 than we have seen in the historical record or the measurements that we've seen there. And so this the salinities didn't change much, but the lack of sea ice in 2018 influenced bringing the water temperatures above zero when they normally are hanging down here below zero throughout most of the summer. So if you look at this from the Sir Wilfrid Laurier, the 218 is in purple, the 219 is in green. The main thing, this is the surface temperature difference just between those 2 years. So just in July, and there was a peak up here, we were around 12 degrees. And I think, Bob, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were having to change your map because of the 14 degrees C on in the August timeframe. I just wanted to point, because that's a dramatic, that's just due to the warming pulse of water that's going through the system. So we do these measurements. This is through the surface flow going through from the DBO1 area up to the DBO5. The middle one, you're looking at salinity. There's a lot of variability around there. But fluorescence peaks that we have around Bering Strait, and then again as we go north of there. But this point here about the warming seawater is pretty evident there. An example of these come off of the Laurier, and the similar things were done. Bob's group did off the Healy to look at the section lines. I would just point out these warm surface waters, as I mentioned, cold bottom waters were down in this area here. This is the region that normally has a plenty in the winter time. And this is an area where we have the threatened sea ducks, so we're seeing declines in bivalve populations, particularly from south to north in this region. By the time we get there in July, you can see the oxygen maximum is sitting just above the picnic line here, and you can see where the fluorescence, our maximum, is right there at the at about a 25-meter depth. So there's still chlorophyll and chlorophyll production going on. So just to give you an example of the 2008 to 2009 sea ice. So the 2012 was our minimum sea ice that we have on record. We're probably going to beat that this year, the way the sea ice is pulling back so dramatically. But in the south of St. Lawrence Island area, 219 is red. It's 18. We lost that sea ice by March of 218, and it never came back again until the fall. 219, we lost it in March again, but then it came back very thin. That little bit of influence of new ice actually lowered the bottom water temperatures in that area. But the impacts of these warm waters on a lot of these organisms are known, but they have a thermal tolerance. So the thermal barrier actually that kept fish, commercial fish out, was not there in 218, which is why they were seeing commercial fish apparently up in cod and pollock up by Bering Strait area. And similarly, we started seeing the videos. I'll show you, won't show you the clip, but I will show you where to find it, which we're seeing pollock, small pollock in our videos now in this region. I just point this out, next one, this is the 5 DBO boxes where we have these bright colors or where we have high biomass areas. Browns are clams, these are amphipods for gray whales, clams for ducks or walrus. The reason I wanted to show you this, and many of you may have seen these persistent footprints, we're doing some modeling out of Woods Hole with Karen Ashton and others there related to what are the drivers and potential change factors for those for this system. But I wanted to point out this trends that we're seeing, these declines, because the environmental change that we're seeing there, we're also seeing declines in the prey biomass for a lot of benthic feeding organisms, be they seabirds in this DBO1 area. This is the gray whale area. But it increases up in the DBO3, but we're seeing this increasing more northward aspect. Like I've mentioned in previous talks, if you take a balloon and you squeeze it in the southern part of it, the expansion seems to be where the carbon is being carried further north. We have collections that we did on the Laurier that are available on YouTube. And I just wanted to point out, you don't have to put all of this on the left here. If you just put DBO into YouTube, you'll come up with these. They're available for everybody. They're clips. But we have some really neat things that happened in 2019, or exciting was that we got great videos, but we started to see a lot more euphausids on the bottom in certain areas. In DBO1, like I said, we were starting to see pollock that got pointed out by our NOAA colleagues when I gave a talk in Nome, because I thought it was a cod, but I'm not a fish person. But these are available. I think at some point you'll be able to see some of this, but it's exciting to see what the bottom looks like. The changes that we're seeing just by the videos are pretty dramatic in the southern part of the system. Then in August, we went out on the Northern Chukchi, the DBO-Northern Chukchi Integrated Study led by NOAA on the Healy. We do the standard measurements, but also expanded by having ichthyoplankton measurements and experiments on board. These are the 3 cruises we've had so far. 2 things I want to point out. We started in from Nome, did DBO1. We managed to go all the way up here. Oops. And then we worked also in the slope current that Bob perhaps in a future talk can talk about what he's seeing. And we also did biological and chemical measurements there. 2 things I wanted to point out. If you're interested, we had a Polar Trek teacher, Piper Bartlett Brown. She worked on the benthic team, but she interviewed all the scientists. And you can actually go to polartrek.com and see all her blogs, as well as some of the NOAA site to see the other outreach. And then the other part is that I gave a talk on August 1st. I'll be loading, I can load that on IARPIC if you're interested. And Bob Picard gave a talk on August 23rd to the local community there. And it was packed rooms, I can say. So there's a lot of interest in the changes that are going on in the particularly there in the northern Bering Sea. Just quickly, Piper was great out there as where we had like 8 outreach components on the cruise, but these are just examples from the Healy on the left and the Laurier on the right, taking CTT, conductivity, temperature, depth, measurements throughout, and looking at also the Laurier, we were looking at productivity. We also had some acidification measurements going on. On the Healy, we also were looking at various standard measures of the chlorophyll nutrients, but particularly also looking at harmful algal blooms and also some acidification carbon measurements. So if you take this is standard measurements of CTD, then the plankton teams, I would note that we had from NOAA the Janet's group, Jan, Chrissy, doing these both the zooplankton and larval fish, because that larval young fish stage gives you an impact of what the composition of the smaller, actually more sensitive organisms are to any environmental changes that are going on there. And they're looking at the potential of the subarctic species moving northward. Arctic cods can thrive in cold waters, but they're starting to see polar cod as well as rather Pacific cod and the pollock further north, and we're seeing larger crabs beyond the clam. The clams were actually seeing declines. The crabs on the bottom were starting to get a larger size of apelio crabs. So then we do the benthic sampling. That's the team we work with Lee Cooper and others on, and looking from be it grabs or doing cores for experiments. This is actually on the Laurier. So the harmful algal blooms, I think we'll get some updates on that. Evie Vachon and Don Anderson's group at Woods Hole, they had a full-on program. We and the benthic team were collecting sediments. We did animal collections also for NOAA for looking at looking at toxins in those. They have a whole program that'll go out next year on this, but looking at the HABs tend to be coming with warmer water and with the more sunlight and declining sea ice. They're seeing further blooms of this Alexandrium, and there's a whole network in Alaska as well as what's going on in various labs at both HUI and others and NOAA on this topic. And I would just point out in the sediments is that they have overwintering cysts. So they're there ready to go once these warming seawaters are seen. And in the benthos, we're actually seeing 2 to 3 degree warming bottom waters earlier in the season. Another topic is ocean acidification. This is just an example of some recent papers that came out and work by Christina Gaethel working here actually at our lab, and then Jessica Cross, and this corrosive area that occurs over the DBO 4 and 5 area seasonally when the 1-omega or the potential for degrading calcite and aragonite occur. And this happens to be one of the last remnants on Hannah Shoal with Ken Dutton on here in the COMETA program that BOEM sponsored, we have quite intense studies looking at the benthos and zooplankton, and this is the last area. The walruses we saw were in the water, but they also came ashore again this year where they have to rest before but a lot of them are going out here to feed in this rich bivalve area. For technology, besides we have moorings in the sites on Healy 1901, we turned around for Japan, the Jamstack moorings, and the DBO-3 in Barrow Canyon, and some of their sediment traps and the collaboration with them. Jessica Cross has the lead on these sail drones, so we met up with them. So they're doing surface atmospheric as well as seawater measurements. They are deployed autonomously. They go out from May through October, run remotely. We met at one to calibrate them, and they have sensors for these measurements, ocean, atmosphere, and subsurface sensors. Marine mammals, observers on both 2 cruises we had here, and we try to have them on the international cruises too. There is an unusual mortality event going on with gray whales. Maybe we can have an update by others that are on the line with that. We did see some dead whales there, but some of them are pretty well decomposed. But we also saw a lot of these subarctic species up north of Bering Strait, particularly in the DBO-3 area where we have humpbacks, gray whales, fin whales. There was even a sighting of a fur seal in the northern Chukchi Sea, which may well be the first seen there. At this point, I think, I mean, there's a lot of data sets that are going to be coming off. I would like to, but that's just kind of in a nutshell to give you a flavor of what those 2 cruises are doing. Kathy Kulete, I think you're on the line. I thought these 3 slides that you sent me, you could take over now unless somebody has any questions right away. We could have the discussion later.
Okay, I'm here.
Jack,
go ahead.
Jackie, this is Gay. I just want to let you know that would not be the first fur seal in the northern Chukchi Sea.
Okay, great. But one of the first few, or others. Okay, well that's good to hear because I heard somebody say something just yesterday, and I'm glad to hear that this you corrected me. Thank you. And then but I know there's some unique animals, and you could probably mention that have be seen further north than they used to be. So Gay, you can fill us in on that. So the Seabird Communities, Kathy, I would just say advance, and I'll move you through those 3 slides.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't have any maps or anything ready for this year's cruises, and I didn't put in last year's. This is more or less an overview of what we're doing. The shown here is a map when we did a cluster analysis from all the cruises going back to 2007, and we try to get on all these research cruises, have at least 1 or maybe 2 observers on board, conducting surveys in between as we transit between stations or ports of call. So if you look at all the data, and I've overlaid the DBO boxes here, we basically fell out to about 6 communities, Seabird communities, and we've named these after the key birds. It's a little bit, the wording sort of a little bit messed up on the key there, but basically we've named them after the most important bird, or the most abundant bird rather, in each of these groups. There's one group that's just characterized by extremely low densities of a very mixed group of birds, and that's the gray box of mostly along the Beaufort and more inshore waters. So the DBO, we concluded, did do a good job of quantifying and describing the Seabird community. I guess I'll point out for future reference, you see the red blobs in the center around the Chirikov Basin area, Bering Strait. That's the highest density areas, and that's mostly composed of planktivorous auklets, least encrusted auklets, and then it also includes shearwaters and other birds. And then the green blob up on top there, I'll point out, that was described as a crested auklet community. There was for many years, there seemed to be a late summer gathering of crested auklets up there. They don't breed in the Chukchi, but they apparently went up there to feed. And one difference I'll just highlight is that today anyway, it appears that the auklets didn't really move into the Chukchi this year. Less so last year, and almost none, at least to date. I haven't heard from the most recent cruise numbers, but from the early cruises and from what I heard from the first part of these cruises, the auklets still were not showing up there. So that's something that's changed this year. Okay, you can go to the next slide. This gives you a breakdown of our survey effort across, that's the map up there, survey effort across the DBO area. We can have up to 63 species total, but species richness is much higher in the northern Bering Sea than the Chukchi, and Beaufort is very low. But as you can see from these columns there represent densities of birds in different species. DBO2 definitely has the highest density of birds normally. That's still the case. In fact, last year and this year in particular, the auklet numbers were very high in the DBO compared to the Chukchi. That's probably because they either were not breeding or they did not move into the Chukchi. And you can see it drops off pretty much as you go further north and further east. That's good. I did want to also point out that shearwaters are a very important component of most of these DBO areas. In fact, they are the numerically dominant species in 5 of the 8 DBOs. And of course, they don't breed here, but they come up here to forage during our summer. Okay, next slide. So as Jackie mentioned, and probably most of you are aware of, there's been a large die-off of shearwaters in Alaska this year. That's mainly been concentrated in the southeastern Bering Sea and the Bristol Bay area. This data is mapped out here by coast. Now these are beach birds, very conservative numbers when they've been reported. They use the most conservative estimate. And many times we have reports of birds washing up on shore but don't have the numbers, so they weren't mapped. But this data comes from coast citizen observers, but also various communities and tribal councils, Alaska Sea Grant, Park Service, USGS, and various refuges around the state. So the seabird die-off did start off in May, low numbers, but included murres and puffins, more in the north, the Bering and Chukchi areas. Very low numbers in June, but in July, that's when we started getting the really large numbers of shearwaters in the southeast Bering Sea. And then now in August, we're getting lower numbers, but it seems much more widespread throughout the Bering Sea, including in the Aleutians and Pribilof Islands. And we do have reports from the Russian colleagues, but we haven't any detail on it yet, but they're reporting many thousands of birds, mainly shearwaters and puffins, washing up on the southern Chukotka Peninsula. So to date, in terms of at-sea surveys, we have been picking up dead birds at sea or counting them, and so far it's about the second highest year for observations of dead birds at sea. This means about 50 birds, roughly, and still counting. We still have a month and a half to go. But it's unusual to see dead birds at sea, so I think it's relevant that we are picking up this many at sea. And I would add that some of the, especially the Ocean Star, has been very good about helping the observers get carcasses at sea when they can. And so we'll be sending those off to be tested, as we have some of the carcasses sent from around the state. To date, they've all been starved, these birds. We can't rule out toxins at this time. There will be further tests, but there's been no diseases detected. So that's it from here, if you have any questions.
Thanks, Kathy. I just wanted to say that we picked up 2 birds on the Healy that went home with Charlie for analysis, and we did have a couple of shorebirds that landed on the ship that were documented when we were off.
Right. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Are there at this point? Go ahead.
I see there's a question from Lord about.
Sorry.
What was your question?
This is Gay, and I'm sorry, I'm in Koktovik, so I don't have access to your slide presentation. I'm just on my cell phone. But do know, Kathy, we've been getting reports from NSB and also North Slope Borough and also from the Russian side. There are dead birds washing in both, and both at Shishmaref, quite a number, Loreno, Providenia, Cape Point Hope up to Cape Thompson. Multi-species, and I just wanted you to know that, you know, I don't know where we're having a meeting. I've been trying to send emails and stuff. I know Rob is probably, well, there's a pretty widespread event underway with multi-species. Thank you.
Right. There has been an uptick again, which this is actually August, September is more typically the time when we would expect to see die-offs. But it certainly is, after a bit of a lull in the midsummer, it picked up strongly with the shearwaters in southeast and
well,
more to the north.
Right, it's not just the shearwaters. This is including cormorants, puffins, murres, whatnot. Right.
The reports we got from Russia have been mainly shearwaters and puffins, but from the Chukchi, as you mentioned, that there's quite a few other species washing up. So yes, we'll be.
I think those reports come from. I think those reports you've been getting are from southern Chukotka, so down by southern Gulf of Anadyr. But these are actually reports today from in the strait, just across from Gamble, along that coastline, and across from Port Clarence.
Mm. So okay, thank
really
you. That would be great.
Strait.
Yeah, that would be great to get that information.
I'll write it up when
Okay, that's great. That's great. Is there any other question? At this point, I thought, you know, the way we wanted the discussion to go is to add on other people who have updates that they want to provide to this discussion section. So I would open it up at this point. I'm going to unshare this presentation, and then we can have bring forward, I don't know, Merritt, did you have a lineup, or Danielle, or just have people add?
I have a question, Jackie. This is Guillermo. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Regarding your slide number 8, well, first of all, thank you for your presentation, you and Kathy. That was not only a great presentation, but also very relevant to IARPIC.
Which one is it?
Number 8 is the one with the time series of SST and the tipping points. That one. No, you already went through it. Anyway, my question is, have you estimated, or your team have estimated time series of variance? And the reason why I'm asking this question is, since you're mentioning tipping points, you know, the nonlinear systems like the Arctic, including the Bering Sea, they typically show a sudden increase of variance as they are approaching a tipping point. And I think it will be really cool to show some evidence of that in time series. Have you done any of that estimations?
Not beyond what you're, like on the lower left, that was just the bottom water. I have to ask Phyllis, because, you know, on her paper, I think she has error bars, but I think that's a very good point. I've always said, you know, the fact that variance would start going up and down as you move into the tipping points. But it's a really good thing to look at, and we have the capability actually to be looking at in our benthic system with the replicates that we have there. So that's a good point, and there hasn't been a concerted area in the work that I have. It's just been starting just around the standard deviation part of it, but I'll look in Phyllis's paper on the physics.
There is a comment by Karen Frey regarding the time series and CIs. That's thank you, Karen. That's relevant to my question, I guess, and to Jackie's answer. Yes, let's chat offline about that. That's a fascinating topic. Thank you.
Hey, Jackie, this is Francis. I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so I had actually a similar question on that slide, and I just, maybe as an aside, I was wondering, because the top you have with the sea surface temperature anomalies, and then the bottom one is the bottom temperatures. And if we can create the similar time series with the variance for both separately, and look at some of those changes, because they're probably behaving very differently in many ways. And so figuring out where those changes are and what's driving the changes both in the surface and the bottom, which is probably different, might be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I would point out that this is sea surface temperature anomalies. I just pulled this out of her paper, but you know, that mooring is sitting on the bottom. So she's got to have bottom water, you know, the values on that too. And I'll have to go back on the paper. You know, I just put these two as just so I could say surface and bottom. But I'm sure she has her data sets from the mooring with a lot more measurements than we actually. These are just point source from our cruise, that one, you know, set of cruise. But I think that's a really good thing to start looking at apples and apples, basically.
Yeah, cool. So, okay, so then my other question was regarding zooplankton. So you had the plankton team, and I know you do zooplankton collections. Was the application for this year? I mean, have they gotten as far as looking at least broadly some of the composition of species or taxa for the zooplankton for this year, if it's any different?
I can answer that question, no, because both of those sets of samples are sitting on ships that are still sailing.
Oh. Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. We'll be looking forward to seeing.
Okay.
So what I might suggest, maybe what we can do for updates is to start with folks who've been out already this season and have updates about the physics and chemistry, environmental drivers, and then we can move up through the trophic levels and then move towards phytoplankton, zooplankton, benthic invertebrates, fishes, seabirds, marine mammals, that way, and then end with folks that have cruises that are still coming up this fall that may have questions for folks who have provided updates about what they've seen already. So I think we've got a few folks who've dealt with physical drivers that have been out already this year. If any of you would like to share any updates, please go ahead.
Hi, Danielle. This is Bob Pickart. So yes, as Jackie mentioned, I was out with her on the Healy cruise. And so as far as the physics go, she did mention this, that, you know, I've been visiting this area since 2002, and I've always used the same temperature color bar, and this year I had to change it because everything was so warm. So we had temperatures that were warmer than 12 degrees C, which was pretty remarkable. And those were surface temperatures, but I also wanted to point out we had really warm bottom temperatures as well. And in fact, in one of our sections that was east of Barrow Canyon, we had bottom temperatures as warm as 8 degrees across the entire Beaufort Shelf, which was pretty remarkable. So I guess the only other thing that I'll mention, Jackie did talk a little bit about the harmful algal bloom. So we did happen upon 2 different harmful algal blooms on the cruise. One of them was near the DBO-3 line. And I know Kathy talked about the bird kills as well. So we had the 2 bird observers, and they were observing that we had sort of an increased number of dead birds versus last year. And Charlie observed an increase in the number of dead birds right near the DBO-3 line where we saw the increased levels of toxins. So it's too early, obviously, to say if there's a cause and effect. But one good piece of news is that we did take a sample of a carcass right at that line. You know, I should mention that it's a little bit difficult for the Healy to go out and grab these birds because it's a big deal to launch your small boat. But it just so happened we were doing a mooring at the same time, so we had the small boat out, so we were able to get a sample. So that'll be interesting to see what that shows. So that was the first bloom we saw. And then the second bloom we saw, which was a bit of a surprise, was on the last section we did to the east of Barrow Canyon, what I just mentioned about with all the warm water. We saw some increased levels of toxins that were very high in our shorewardmost station. And as we progressed across the shelf towards the shelf break, they remained high, and then they dropped off right at the shelf break. And if you look at the temperatures were really high at the bottom, and then they dropped off right at the shelf break. So I have to believe that bloom was probably, you know, remotely, you know, formed somewhere and just got advected along the sort of the boundary current system, you know, the Alaska Coastal Current, as it, you know, shoots to the north and goes through Barrow Canyon and takes a right and heads into the Beaufort. I think that it was just carrying the bloom with it, and we saw it. And the same thing might have happened, might have been the same for the bloom we saw the DBO3 line as well. That might have just come through Bering Strait, and we just happened to sample it as we did the DBO3 line. So yeah, so that's I guess that's all I'll say for now.
Thanks for that, Bob. Does anybody have any more to follow on what Bob said?
Hey, this is Ryan. We were out on the Ocean Star at the same time that Bob and company were out on the Healy, and I'll just basically reiterate what some of those folks said. In our CTD cast, we were seeing 11, 12 degrees C in the surface layer. So that's not just at the surface, but that's all the way through the mixed layer at the top. So that's down to 10, 15, 20 meters deep, 11, 12 degrees Celsius. So that's very warm surface water. Notably, if I recall correctly, we were mostly seeing subsurface chlorophyll maxes in the Chukchi. But just to carry over, we did sample on the Beaufort line a bit, and the chlorophyll was primarily concentrated in the surface waters over there. So maybe that also corresponds with the bloom that Bob was just talking about. We had a notable lack of ichthyoplankton in our bongos. We didn't get a lot of bongo sampling in, but for the ones that we did get, we didn't see a lot of ichthyoplankton in those samples. We did see a lot of dead birds as well at DBO3, and we were able to capture at least, I guess, over the whole cruise, maybe 5 or more different dead birds, and those were also multiple species. We saw a couple of deceased walruses throughout the cruise. I mistook one for one of our mooring buoys because it happened by around the same time that we released one of our moorings to recover it. And then we also did observe quite a few walruses on our way to the CEO mooring site. Not in one large group. It was more like 2 or 3 here and there. But on our transit from sort of offshore of Icy Cape over to CEO, we must have seen on the order of 100 different walruses out in the water. So.
Great, thanks, Ryan.
So
we have
this
anyone else
is
on
Gay
the line?
Sheffield again.
Go ahead, Gay.
Thanks. So, I'm listening to all these. This is great that people are sort of giving their overview. Is there going to be a product, or I don't know if there's anyone on the line from the community, because certainly what you guys are seeing offshore is really important for those of us who have a more of a near shore view and perspective. So is there a way that this will be written up such that it can be delivered to the communities? And I want to thank those who did do in Nome the straight science. I think Bob and Janet Duffy Anderson, Jackie, of course, and others. Those have been really, really, as Jackie noted, it was really well attended. People are seeing, we know we're in a situation here that is comprehensively, I would say there's nobody thinking there isn't an ecosystem-wide shift going on. And the transfer of information from offshore and nearshore, both from the communities and to the scientists, might be a really good discussion point, because I think now everybody's really alert. I know we all are on the coast. I'm sitting in Koktovik, and the nearest ice is almost 300 miles to the north of us. This has never happened to us before, and we don't know how the subsistence harvest of bowheads is going to play out. We're all pretty concerned at this point up here in the Beaufort. But thank you.
So just one way to address the first question that you had was, so this is Ryan. We were on the Ocean Star again, and we'll be compiling a cruise report. We've got a lot of, the information from leg 1. We'll be waiting for legs 2 and 3 to finish, but then my understanding is that once we get everything compiled, that entire cruise report also gets shuffled out to community members as well.
Yeah, this is Bob.
Community members is great, but you need to be making sure that the tribes are getting that, that all the tribes are getting it, not just community members who are on your, I mean, I think you guys do a great job with the everyday reporting of where the vessel is, but I want to emphasize too, because of the federal connection, you really want to make sure that tribes are receiving those cruise reports as well. A lot of times they may be in language that is not familiar. So is there an effort, and I don't know if that's something that's not in your purview, I'm sure, but somebody else's, to hook in and maybe make a smaller, like 2-pager for, as was done, I think, last year with a lot of the cruises, that was presented at the Alaska Federation of Natives and was really helpful for spreading the results far and wide.
Gay, this is Bob Pickard. That's a really good point. So, we're going to have a cruise report. It's going to be really long. It's going to have lots of detail in it. It's probably not the document to share, with the local communities, but we can easily put together a short 2-pager. I guess I'm hearing that it was done last year, so we'd be happy to do that this year. And I'd also point out that the DBO-NCIS program also has a website, and we'll try to, we keep that up to date, but maybe we can also try to, do something that's a little more user-friendly for the community. So it's a good idea.
Yeah, and
well,
this
I'm trying
is
to
Ryan.
think of ways to get a doc. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to add the fact that we invite community and tribal members to our PI meetings as well, where we have lengthy discussions and present some of the information with them, and in addition to the cruise report. So it's not just the cruise report that we do, but there are other avenues that we try to reach out and communicate with.
How comprehensive is that?
Sorry, this is Danielle. I can see in the chat that Amy Holman is confirming that we are planning to pull together some 1 to 2 pagers again this year following the field season, similar to the way she managed to pull those together for AFN last year. So I'm encouraged to see that, and we can work through the chat to get everybody information about that. So moving up through the trophic levels, do we have folks who would like to provide updates from the phytoplankton, zooplankton realm?
This is Lisa Eisner. I was on the ship with Ryan McCabe, so the Ocean Star, and a lot of our data is still being processed. I did do primary production experiments at 16 of the sites we were at, and we did phytoplankton taxa looking with flow cytometry, then also a flow cam, so an imaging microscope. I saw a lot of, when I saw blooms, they were often either a lot of chain diatoms like Catossaurus or the flagellate, dinoflagellate communities. So we went through a lot of different water masses with different phytoplankton communities. And we still have to put it all together to see what the stories are. That's kind of what I have from just getting off the boat.
I have a question. This is Ian Hurwell. Is anybody looking at the jellyfish population dynamics?
We'll get the smaller jellyfish will be in the zooplankton toes. We didn't do a lot of those. And then we will pull up jellyfish in our fish toes, which we didn't do on leg 1. They will be, they're doing them now, and then for leg 2 and 3. And we do enumerate, at least by weight, the different major taxa of jellyfish.
We also have local reporting of jellyfish that goes on and is usually captured. This is Gay Sheffield. That gets captured by our CDQ group. So when people complain about the nets being full of jellyfish or the timing of jellyfish has changed, that is being captured regionally, at least in the Bering Strait. Thank you. And I don't know if Kristen Cecil's on the line, but I believe she does quite a bit with jellyfish as well. Thank you. Noah.
Okay, well, welcome folks to add to the discussion of the zooplankton, ichthyoplankton, if there's anyone who has any information to share. And if not, we'll move our way up through the trophic levels to benthic invertebrates and fishes.
Hey, Danielle. This is Mindy Richland from Dawn Anderson's lab at HUI, and Bob had mentioned a bit about some of the results from this past cruise, and I just thought I can add a bit to what our sampling plans are and analysis plans are upcoming.
Great, go ahead, Mindy.
Okay, so just briefly to review, this is our second year of sampling via the DBO cruises, and we're collecting both water and sediment samples, and the water samples are being analyzed for Alexandrium and Pseudonychia communities. And we collected sediment samples to map out the distribution of dormant resting cysts of Alexandrium, and also to isolate and germinate these cysts to establish cultures for an analysis of toxin profiles and genetic connectivity. And based on results from last year, and also by other groups that have sampled up in the Chukchi Sea, a very substantial cyst seedbed has been discovered. It was first documented by colleagues from Japan, and the cyst concentrations there are up to around 11,000 cysts per cubic centimeter, and this is the second highest that have been reported for this species globally. And so one of the research questions has been whether or not blooms that have been observed in the Chukchi Sea both last year and this year are derived from in situ germination of these populations, or transported populations, or both. And so one of our plans going forward is to carry out microsatellite studies to look at connectivity across the region. And we'll also be working up these samples, as well as a number of samples being provided to us from our colleague Kathy LaFave at NOAA Northwest Fisheries Science Center. But yeah, I think that's it. And Bob had covered some of the other observations.
Great, thanks, Mindy. Who would like to share next?
This is Lisa Eisner. I just wanted to point, we also have somebody on board the Ocean Star doing these similar measurements for the HABs, and for both Alexandrium pseudonychia. Again, the samples will be sent to Woods Hole and Kathy LaFave.
Okay, so we'll open it up to anyone. If anyone has any updates broadly you'd like to share from 2019 field observations so far, please go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Ken Dunton. I got a little report for the Beaufort Sea for you.
Sure, go ahead, Ken. Thanks.
Hi, you bet. That was all very interesting here from the Chukchi. A lot of amazing changes going on, especially when you look at the higher trophic levels with seabirds. It's very concerning. Okay, just those 2 or 3 minute update from the Beaufort side. This will cover the period starting in April when we went through the ice measurements through just last week when we left Katowice and Prudhoe, and Elson Lagoon out west. First, our April field season was actually distinct in that one of the biggest surprises we saw was outflowing of the Sag River had already begun by the time we were drilling through the ice in the central Beaufort Sea on Sefton Sound. So we had 1 meter of fresh water overlying saltier water on the seabed, and that's depths of about 5 meters. That was a huge surprise, very unexpected. Generally, ice algae were generally absent in most of the lagoons from Elson out east, although we did see some ice algae in Katowice Lagoon. That's something I've noticed over the years. It's not a lot of ice algae in the lagoons. We have as far as ice is concerned, we got sea ice mass balance buoys out. Andy Mahoney has deployed those, and don't have a lot of information on that data yet, except we did notice that sea ice thickness I've noticed it's much less than it has been in decades ago. It's down to 1.3 to 1.5 meters generally, as opposed to closer to 1.7. We moved into another surprise in April, that some of you might be very interested in, is that Andy Mahoney and I started drilling through the fast ice in the lagoons in water depths less than 2 meters. And I didn't know this, but the ice is not frozen to the bottom. There's actually a layer of very, very salty water on the between the seabed and the ice, and that water reaches temperatures of -6 degrees centigrade, salinities as high as 90, as high as 90, and there's live organisms in that layer of water, which we found very, very exciting, very interesting. The breakup actually occurred much earlier than it has in previous years, we noticed that there's a lot of fauna that's overwintering in frozen sediments, which you knew about for oligochaetes and chironomid larvae, but our surprise was seeing things like polychaetes, like Spio, that actually overwinter in frozen sediments, and that's a important discovery, because of the fact that there's so many thousands of birds that start migrating north as early as June, May, and are feeding on that bathtub ring in the shallow nearshore areas, and are obviously getting a lot of their nutrition, a lot of their food resources coming from those shallow benthic sediments, where there's quite a bit of infauna from oligochaetes to polychaetes that have managed to overwinter. And as far as the summer is concerned, as everybody else noticed, the ice retreat has produced massive ocean waves. In fact, I've never seen anything quite like it. We had swells of 6 to 8 feet, 2 to 3 meters at times. A massive erosion along the coast. I'm hearing reports from our group in the Western Beaufort of 20 meters out there toward Drew Point. And also at Kaktovik, there's been an amazing amount of loss. Fish observations were absolutely stunning. I don't know if you've heard, but it's a big year in the Beaufort Sea coast, all the way to Kaktovik, with pink salmon runs. It's a very odd year of a massive amount of Pacific salmon in the Beaufort Sea. We caught them in fyke nets. The locals at Kaktovik were fishing in Camden Bay and catching large amounts of pink salmon. We've seen a second year of weak Arctic cisco migration. That's a bad sign for subsistence at this moment. So in any event, it's been a very interesting set of observations from the Chukchi through the Beaufort. So I'll stop there. But we also have kept. I don't know if I'm sorry if you've seen it out there at Kaktovik, but we have been distributing our first newsletter to the community of Kaktovik, and there might be one there at the bunkhouse. Okay, but we've tried to meet with them annually, or actually biannually, once in January, February, and then during the summer, and we distribute newsletters about what we're doing and to the community and meet with a lot of the folks there. Okay, I think that sums it up.
Thanks, Ken. That was really interesting. Thanks for joining us to share that. That's great. I just want to remind everybody, if you're not speaking, to please mute your line. We had a little bit of background noise while Ken was speaking. Is there anyone else on the line who'd like to share?
Yeah, this is Gay. I don't know if we're just focusing up north. Again, I'm sorry to join late, but for fish in the Norton Sound area, our commercial crab fishery was I think the word is dismal. We had very few king crab caught in relation to what we should have, to the quota, and most people were confounded by pulling large Pacific cod out of their pots. So, for example, my neighbor went and gave us 5 Pacific cod. I said, thanks, and he said, nah, you're doing me a favor. I checked my pots, this was in July, and he got 5, or late June, he got 5 king crab and 70 large Pacific cod. So we have been a bit confounded by the cod. We're wondering why they're hitting the bait so hard. We don't know if they're hungry. And I think Lyle Britt's group, NOAA Race Division, ADF&G in Nome, and our CDQ group, the Norton Sound Economic Development Corporation, are working together to get some samples to look at the health of the cod right during July. Up here, as Ken, and thanks, Ken, about that newsletter. I don't know if I can get on the mailing list for that, but that'd be great. The people here are reporting and have shown photos of king salmon and reporting this migration of salmon, or this large catch of salmon, all the way into Canada, camps in Aklavik and Shingle Point. Those were places where people were also catching salmon too, and they're not welcome. People would rather have the char, and they're concerned about the number of salmon, honestly, and that they might be competing with their more preferred subsistence fish. So right now we have had a month of rain, people are reporting, and I arrived here, I've been here about a week, and we have had nonstop rain. Today is the first day. What is concerning, though, is that I called the Weather Service to ask, are you guys catching this? This has to be a record event for the amount of fresh water. And they said the FAA is the only place they're getting their readings, where there's a weather gauge from the automated airport information tower. And the gauge is broken, and it says that for this whole, we've gotten 0.03 of an inch. And it has been a constant downpour. So know that something as simple as a rain gauge, they're missing a rather large event, which Ken is picked up in the ocean anyway. But on land, I mean, it seems really frustrating. So know that wherever we've traveled this spring and summer and now fall, people along the coast are fully aware there is a real problem afoot, and they are very interested in getting information. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Gay.
And this is Vanessa Von Bila.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
I Ken summarized a lot of my fish observations from the slope. Thanks for that, Ken. I just also wanted to point out that we also got Arctic cod in our nearshore fyke nets, and we've fished these places the last couple years and not been getting them. So it was kind of interesting to see that juxtaposition of getting both the Pacific salmon and finally starting to see some Arctic cod in some of these more protected nearshore areas that we haven't seen in the last couple years of field work. And then also juxtapose all the observations of salmon in western Alaska rivers where it was too hot and they seem to be actually dying of heat stress with eggs still retained inside them. So a real interesting year all the way around.
Thanks for that, Vanessa. Jim Thompson, I
this
know
is
you've
Gay.
Go ahead, Gay.
No, the speaker just before me brought up a good point. We had massive, we had a heat wave in the Norton Sound, Bering Strait region, and the water temperatures in our major rivers in the eastern Norton Sound went to 21 degrees Celsius, and we had the returning pink salmon were suffocating in the rivers and then washing out pre-spawn. This was really troubling for people to see in our region. Of course, we don't have events like this, although they can occur interior, not new. But for us, it was sort of a novel, uncomfortable thing to see. And it spread. It went from eastern Norton Sound all the way around Norton Sound down into the Bethel region, the YK Delta. The water temperatures cooled off when our air temperatures finally cooled off, but the heat stress is a longer term issue, and we have seen that fish are continuing to die, and that is because they've really been hit hard. I think it affects their proteins. But anyway, know that was widespread in our region as well, in the Bering Strait region. Thank you.
And I can just follow up a little bit about that too. This is Vanessa Von Bila again with USGS. We have an ongoing project looking at heat stress in the Yukon River Basin, and should have some papers out over the next year. We did a controlled experiment with adult Chinook salmon in the lower river, and then we used that to basically identify a signature of heat stress from salmon that looked otherwise healthy and apply that new biomarker method using gene transcription and the expression of heat shock protein 70 to start estimating the prevalence of heat stress. And this was even just from fish collected in 2016 and 2017. So still what were warm years, but not as warm as this year, 2019.
Okay, so I just want to point out that we're at just about 11:05. We do have the ability to go to 11:30, so I will be happy to continue this conversation as long as folks are willing. I just wanted to point out the time. I know we have Jim Thompson on the line, who has a cruise planned later this fall, and the Arctic Integrated Ecosystem Research Program also has a cruise that will end at the end of September. So I want to allow Jim and others a chance to talk about other field sampling opportunities coming up this fall, and ask if they would like to ask any questions of folks who have already been out there on the water that could put their future work in context, and then see if other folks who have conducted observations already this spring and summer want to make any requests for folks going out this fall to look out for anything in particular.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Danielle. This is Jim. So this is Jim Thompson at the University of Washington, and Lucia Haskova is a postdoc working with me here on this project. We have a new project where we're looking at physical processes along the coast, and the big waves that Ken Dunton was just talking about, that's really the driver for what we're looking at. So we've been working out in the Deep Basin for many years. We have mooring, wave observations from moorings in the Central Beaufort going back to 2012, and we see a very clear signal that when there's less ice, there's more fetch, and so you grow bigger waves, and that's a very clear signal. And now we're trying to take that to the coast and see what that means for the coast. And of course, we know at places like Drew Point and Kaktovik, there's already been a lot of erosion happening for the last few decades. So we're just trying to build on that. We have a few things in the water now. We went out in the first week of August using the UPIC out of Prudhoe, and we put out 6 moorings that measure temperature and waves, and they'll be out for a full annual cycle. And then we have a November cruise on Sikuliaq that will leave Nome in the first week of November and be out for the rest of the month. And we'll be putting out more moorings, and we'll be doing some measurements of opportunity. We'll basically be storm chasing and looking for wave events where waves are impinging on the coast right around the time when the ice should be, coming back, and maybe there's some shore-fast ice starting to form, and we really want to see that shoulder season, that transition, and basically see, when is shore-fast ice able to protect the coast? And we know right now the coast is wide open and exposed, and big things are happening. We're happy to hear more from people who are out there in the field as to where the hotspots are and where they're seeing big events, and let us know places you think are really particularly interesting to focus on, and where that might guide some of our modeling and some of the satellite observations we're doing, and might guide some of the in situ too. And so anyway, we'll be out in November with that effort. There's another effort on that same cruise, and it's a project that Franz Mutter from the University of Alaska Fairbanks has funded, and that's looking at cod and seeing what the polar cod are doing late in the season. That project is funded by the ARICE program to have international shared icebreaker use. So I can put you in contact with him if you want to know more about that, but we'll be trying to do some, physical biological overlays there with that. So yeah, again, happy to have people point out hotspots, and happy to have people, if there are small things you want to tack onto that November effort. It's pretty late to have an icebreaker there that late in the season. But of course, what we mean by late in the season is changing rapidly. So anyway, we'll be up all along. We'll go as far to the east as Kaktovik, almost Kaktovik, not quite. Flaxman Island is as far as we'll go. We'll probably be there mid-November, and then we'll start working our way back around, ending in Dutch in December 3rd. Okay.
Thanks, Jim. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Jim?
Danielle, there is a question
Jim,
from Ollie in the chat asking if they're using bottom pressure sensors for wave observations. Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, and returning to the chat, there were some earlier questions that were posed that I'd like to return to. I know someone asked if anyone sampled a coccolithophore bloom in the Bering Sea earlier this year. Does anyone have any information about that?
This is Jackie. We didn't have any I mean, it was, visually we didn't have any indication, and from no one mentioned anything who were looking at any shipboard taxonomy that I know of. But maybe Lisa, did you see anything? Lisa Eisner?
So maybe Lisa's not online right now. I'm not sure. This is Ryan McCabe. We were aware of the coccolithophore bloom before we left dock. Our cruise track didn't take us near there. My understanding is that the bloom was sort of more inland than where we were headed. So I don't recall actually seeing, visually seeing any obvious bloom. But for the samples that we did do, I mean, that can be analyzed. But yeah, I don't think we were actually inside the coccolithophore bloom.
Danielle, this is Dean Stockwell.
Go ahead, Dean.
The Leos had reported seeing a satellite image that they passed on to me. And the image apparently looked like a coccolithophore bloom. It was kind of the white water that we saw back in '97. But that bloom was south of Nunavak, and on the ships that were coming in, it was a little bit to the east of their tracks. So I doubt if anybody came through those waters to get a sample. And it's still there right now.
Thanks for that, Dean.
Yep.
This is Kathy. So, Dean, where did you say that it's still there, the coccolithophore bloom potential?
The latest images still show those light spots south of Nunavak, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we had another question earlier from Amy Holman saying that Rick Toman's latest, or Rick's sea surface temperature graphics show close to average temperatures in the Bering Strait, which he attributed to storms. Is anyone looking at the intersection of or connecting research on future storminess and bottom and surface temps? Sounds like in the northern regions that Jim Thompson's project is looking at some of that. Does anyone have any more to add? Okay. So I'll invite anyone on the line to share any updates, either to continue this conversation or just general updates. One thing I wanted to mention before too many folks leave the line is that there is a plan for a session at the upcoming Ocean Sciences meeting in February, where the types of things that have been discussed today will be welcome, and the abstract submission is open now. I believe it closes sometime in early September. So I just wanted to mention that for folks, that you should look for that special session if you're going to Ocean Sciences. And I can send a link to that session to Meredith to include in the minutes that will be circulated following the call.
Thanks, Danielle. I have a quick comment, I guess. Line's gone kind of quiet.
Go ahead, Gay.
Oh, and that would be for anyone on the line. Please know that if you have the opportunity to provide some outreach materials for any of the communities that you're visiting or that you're working with, I highly urge you to do it as frequently as you can. This is an interesting situation we find ourselves in. I think this is the speed with which this is unfolding is pretty impressive. I think that speaking in my region, people are very concerned regarding their subsistence activities and what will happen this fall. There is a food security and public health issue with what is occurring in all realms, and it should not be underestimated. So please work with those in the transportation or regional hubs, and we're more than willing and happy to get your information out to the communities. It's getting more and more important. Thank you.
Thanks, Gay. I couldn't agree more. Molly McCammon noted in the chat that she's also hoping to put in a town hall request for ocean sciences, so keep an eye out for that as well.
You mentioned this already, but yeah, those abstract deadlines are coming up fast for not ocean sciences, but also there's other meetings that are coming up. I don't know if we're going to talk about, or we'll just post those.
Right, does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add to the conversation? And okay, the other thing I wanted to mention, because we do have a number of folks who don't typically join our calls every month on the line, is that we do have a YouTube playlist for our Marine Ecosystems Collaboration Team. So we have been recording the webinar, and the recording will be available both via the IARPC Collaborations website. If you're a member, I urge all of you to join the website and encourage your colleagues to do that as well. But you can also access recordings of this specific meeting via that YouTube channel. So please feel free to share that far and wide with your colleagues. And we will also, via the IARPC Collaborations website, where we post the notes from this webinar, we have a chat feature there, so anyone who has access can add to that chat and keep this conversation going. So I encourage you all to use that. I also wanted to mention that as team leaders, we will be working in the near term to put together our annual reporting for IARPC, and we'll be working to try to capture under each of our performance elements new projects that have been started or updates on ongoing projects. So please reach out to me, to Jackie, and to Guillermo to make sure that your work is highlighted. And know that you can also, if you're an IARPC member, you can go directly to those performance elements and add information yourself to make sure that things are captured in the language you want. So I encourage you all to please engage with that and make sure that you're getting proper credit for all the great work you're doing. So thank you very much, everyone, for making the time to join us today. This is a really engaging discussion. I think we're all coming away from this with quite a lot. And I encourage you to keep joining our webinars and keep this conversation going month by month. We're always happy during the update section to hear information about what you're seeing out there. So thanks, everyone. And unless anyone has anything else to add, we'll wrap up this webinar for this month.